Hello and welcome to The Print. I'm Snehesh Alex Philip. Well, US President Donald Trump has done the unthinkable for some, and for some, it was on expected lines. The US has carried out the bombing of three important nuclear enrichment sites of Iran. Basically, Trump has joined the war against Iran. Now, what do we make sense out of it? Where does the world head from now? To carry forward this discussion and to understand this better, I have with me Kabir Taneja, the Deputy Director for Strategic Studies at the ORF. He's someone who's an expert on the Middle East, and I often speak to him to understand really what's happening in that part of the world. Welcome to the print, Kabir.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Kabir, my first thing, Trump came in promising to end conflicts, right? He's someone who's been pitching for eyeing a Nobel Peace Prize, but then he's gone ahead and carried out these strikes. Why?
So, interesting question because, if you remember just, I think yesterday or day before, he said that there is going to be a 2-week, period where he wants to think about what to do next. He's not particularly sure if the military option is the correct option. His entire President Trump's entire campaign of presidency during his first term and the second term was based around the fact that the idea of Pax Americana, that is, America getting involved in these foreign wars, is something that he has never subscribed to, and he wants the US to exit these kind of situations. But now this is further entrenchment rather than an exit. And so I think he's consistent. He's sort of carried this tradition of American military interventions in the Middle East over the past at least 6-7 presidents, right? So they've been trying to break that chain, and he was supposed to be the president that breaks that chain. But as we are seeing right now, that he's taken the other route by attacking the 3 nuclear facilities in Iran.
Interesting is that during the Obama tenure, when during his own campaign, Trump had said that Obama will carry out a strike on Iran because he is a weak negotiator. He cannot get a deal out of it, and he's going to, run the world into another endless conflict. But that's exactly what Trump has done, right?
Exactly, and but I don't think. See, I believe that there are a lot of people, analysts, whether or people sort of following foreign policy or Trump as a president, want to believe that he's a strategist or he's a grand strategist or he's sort of going to reshape American grand strategy on the kind of laurels that he wants the US to be in the next 20-30 years. He's not that kind of strategist, right? He's impulsive, moving forward, we are in a very sort of gray zone on what kind of reaction now comes from Iran, because there are about 40 to 50,000 American troops peppered across the Middle East, and not just peppered across the Middle East, but peppered across Gulf states that host these troops. And Iran has previously said that if the nuclear facilities are bombed, they will target these American bases and American installations in the region. And American installations in the region are based around Gulf countries. So there are multiple states now under threat, depending on what action Iran chooses to take. And we have to finally remember that any nation or state which is pushed against the wall has a tendency to react in a non-calm manner, right? Especially if the dispensation, if the political dispensation is threatened, the response is usually not linear. So now we are in a territory where we don't know. I would be very surprised if Iran does not react. But now we are in a territory where we are not sure what is going to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours.
So you're saying that, you'd be surprised if Iran does not react. In terms of reaction, what do you think? You know this region very well. You know Iran quite well. So what do you think would be Iran's next steps? If they are carrying out any kind of strike, where are they likely to strike and at what scale?
Look, we know that Iran's conventional capabilities are very diminished, right? The Israelis have taken out their air defenses. The Israelis have taken out their missile launchers. The Israelis have taken out n number of their conventional military equipment, and which did not go very deep anyway. So they had limited sort of strike capabilities. They still have missiles. I think they have numbers with missiles.
Yeah.
So targets across the region are within their range still to this day. Now, what else can they do? I think we have to first wait and see what kind of conversations come from within Tehran. We are not really sure where or what the thinking of of Ayatollah Khamenei is. We have to also wait and see the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is sort of really responsible for Iran's security and directly is under the auspice of the Ayatollah. How do they react? What are they thinking? What kind of relationship comes up between the Ayatollah and the IRGC itself? Because all these domestic factors and with political factors will determine the kind of reaction that we are going to see. But at the end of the day, if the very veracity of the regime is threatened, then the probability of acting out is much higher in an irrational manner, and that becomes a problem for the entire region, whether it's for the UAE or Bahrain or Kuwait, which are within the sort of proximity. Iran can completely mine the Strait of Hormuz, choking global oil and gas supplies. Countries like Qatar, which are in that sort of space, provide a good chunk of global 20 to 25% of natural gas. India's natural gas comes from Qatar. India's oil comes from this part of the world, and choking out Strait of Hormuz is one option that they can do. They can completely mine the entire water body there. So there are these other options that they do have to sort of bog the US down more, and also come up and build pressure, international pressure, to push President Trump in coming back to some sort of stance of negotiation, if nothing else.
Okay. Interesting that you've given out all these options, but my fear is that if these options are indeed put into place and they really act on it, then there is chance of a prolonged conflict is very clear, right?
100%. Then and that's what Iran has been threatening for a long period of time. That if push comes to shove, it would not hesitate to take this beyond the US Iran dynamic. Look, there were reasons why countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, normalized their relationship with Iran couple of months ago, because they foresaw this kind of situation coming, and they did not want to be party to this kind of conflict between the US, Israel on one side and Iran on the other. So they did a dash towards neutrality, basically. Now, whether that neutrality sticks now, considering a lot of these countries host American bases, we have to see. And they have tried to sort of negotiate that as well. There were multiple reports, couple of months ago, that Arab countries in the region that host these bases have told the Americans that if they mount an attack against Iran, it cannot come from the bases on their soil. So, which is why we saw the B-2s coming probably from Diego Garcia, and we saw the Tomahawk cruise missiles that targeted Isfahan and Natanz coming probably from the Mediterranean. So yeah. So now as I said, it's a bit of a gray zone at this point of time. But all eyes should be on what kind of activity we see in Tehran, because it's not a given that the chain of commands are completely intact or not, or are completely talking to each other at this point of time. So the response time will depend on how cogent the conversations are within the leadership in Tehran.
Interestingly is that while Trump, called Iran the Middle East bully, right, the bully in the region, many would say that Trump himself acts like a bully only. But his tweet a few days back, in which he said that they know exactly where the Iranian supreme leader is, and they are not taking him out yet. How dangerous is that statement? And do you think that the US would try and take out the Iranian supreme leader?
Look, let me put it this way: the Iranian supreme leader, taking out the Iranian supreme leader has unknown consequences. for the US as well, right? Because the entrenchment of the Iranian regime is quite solid, and let's go back to 1980 to 88 when Iran fought a war with Iraq, where it
Yeah,
also got a bloody nose, and was forced to sign a peace sort of ceasefire agreement against its will. And at that time also there were conversations about how threatened the regime is going to be, considering the war had gone on for 8 years. Public discontent was enormous. But having said that, they still came out of it fairly strengthened, if and not weakened. And we have to also remember there's a lot of posturing when the Americans say that we know where the Ayatollah is and we can take him out.
yeah,
That's largely based on basically Israeli intelligence being provided. But the Ayatollah is 86 years old, and the conversations have already been taking place over the past 2 years of a succession plan, right? So as far as I see it, even if the Ayatollah was taken out today, let's say, the succession plan in place would move fairly swiftly with the replacement. You have to remember that Iran is a polity, and Iranian government is a system based on theology and ideology first, right? So the entrenchment is usually very, very significant. The IRGC, where a lot of people are saying, maybe it's a military coup within the IRGC. Some commanders will come up and say, look, the decision making is not happening here. Someone really has to take over the reins, and we'll do it. But the IRGC is also part of that theological system. It will not challenge, as far as I see it, the supremacy of the supreme leader. So even if I think if the Ayatollah was eliminated by an airstrike or so on, if you see some of the statements he's made, he will consider himself, and his followers will consider himself as a martyr,
yeah.
which, for example, what happened to Soleimani. So if you go to Iran, Qasem Soleimani is almost like a national figure now, right? So that would happen, and I think a swift replacement will come in, because they've been into that process for a long period of time.
You-
So, yeah.
there is no doubt, Kabir, that a swift replacement will come. But at the end of the day, he is not a political leader alone. He is a religious leader. So I just want to understand the possible fallout in the larger global scenario of a religious leader being taken out, let's say in a missile strike or whatever strike, taken out. What is the fallout in the other region? Do you think that the other Islamic countries, even if they are Sunnis, they'll suddenly be more beware of how the US and Israel operates? Because if tomorrow it is this religious leader, then tomorrow it can be anybody else.
But Snesh, I think that there are no sort of illusions anywhere in the region that the American support comes with a lot of caveats, and it's a relationship that has to be managed, and much before any of such strikes or such hypotheses, that what happens if you take a leadership at that level out. We saw that happening during the Arab Spring on a more peaceful note. Right, the leaderships were challenged, leaderships were removed, and the Americans really didn't come to their
Also
aid.
political leadership.
But
He's a religious figure.
Yeah, no, but Ayatollah is a religious figure with all the political power. So
Yeah,
so it's the same thing. So President Pezeshkian, for example, or any Rouhani before him, and so on and so forth. Yes, they do have a significant say in things once they are elected, but their election is based on vetting done by the supreme leader, right? So you
absolutely.
cannot run for elections without supreme leader's blessings. So he knows, he controls the political outcomes for good or bad, right? And the Iranians want to show that they do elections because it's the only country in the region that does elections. So they want to portray this, that look, ultimately the people have a say in on who governs them. And yes, the Ayatollah is absolutely the supreme leader. But it's taking out leadership. Iran is not a small country, right? Iran is a country of 90 million people. It has a huge civilizational baggage to it,
Yeah,
taking someone like the Ayatollah out has grave consequences, much beyond the Iranian political discourse, because then you are also in a gray area where you don't know what comes next. Right? It could be someone equally bad or worse, that takes over the reins, and pushes the entire region into complete disarray. So we don't. So those calculations need to be made, I think, before any bravado comes into play, that yes, we can take the Ayatollah out. But I think most of it is posturing at this point of time.
So you're saying, Trump's actions could lead to a complete disarray in the entire region, right?
Possible, yeah, possible, yeah.
My last question on this is the possible impact on India. Where does
Mm.
India stand in all this? And what is the impact that India is going to face?
Look, India is going to, I mean, direct impact, not so much politically, at least, of course, because we are at a slight distance. But, for example, over the years, India has been sort of not publicly very overtly, but like most other countries, India is also not in favor of a nuclear Iran. Like India has, I mean, any nuclear power is usually not in favor of another nuclear power coming out,
Absolutely.
right? So it's a power dynamic, it's a deterrence dynamic, both. But during the JCPOA, India sort of aligned with President Obama's position. They stopped taking all oil from Iran. They almost isolated Iran economically, which is a bad move in my opinion. But they tried. So the JCPOA was signed. But what no one saw coming was that President Trump is going to exit the JCPOA. Which he did. So there were arrangements and agreements that were in place that could have arrested a lot of what is happening today many years ago. But ideologically, President Trump has always been against a nuclear deal, the JCPOA, and he wanted his own stamp on a nuclear deal that was going to be signed with Iran. Right,
Yeah.
and that ultimately did not happen. And I think the Israelis sold what is happening in Iran very well to President Trump. What the whispers they did in the ears of President Trump, that how close they are to the bomb and how well they know Iran inside, which is true, ultimately swayed the president's decision-making process and said, okay, fine, let's take it out now, because clearly diplomacy is not going anywhere. Foreign Minister Agarchi was sitting in Geneva with the Europeans when this happened.
Yeah.
Trying to work out a diplomatic off ramp, and I mean, poor Europeans as well. They were used as bait, basically, considering they are allies of the Americans. So, but I think. Coming back to the point I made at the start of our conversation, everyone wants the president to have rationality and strategy in his thinking, but it's very impulsive in nature, and I think the Israelis figured that out very well.
So Israeli whispers really worked for Israel, right? As
I
you
believe
say.
so. I believe so.
I know I said that was the last question, but just because you mentioned this, I'm suddenly reminded of the DNI Tulsi Gabbard. She is missing in action. For example, even today when the Trump made the statement, she was not there with him, right? 2 months back, it was her opinion, which was rubbished by Trump, that the Iranians are not close to having a nuclear bomb as being propagated and alleged by Israel. So, where is she now?
Look, I mean, it was very, very clear that paths had diverged between the American intelligence apparatus and the president, right? Then the DNI reports that were coming out back then said that we have no conclusive evidence that the Iranians are making a dash for a nuclear weapon. Yes, they have programs, but making a dash for nuclear weapons, while the Israelis were saying we know for sure that at least 9 bombs can be constructed in a very, very short period of time. So ultimately, that's the intelligence the President Trump chose, which is the Israeli intelligence rather than his own intelligence. And if you see some of the reporting that was coming out in the American press, the DNI was leaking like a tap, because they were very worried that President Trump is not reading his briefings on Iran, and they had even brought in a lot of people within the DNI who were Iran hawks, but were people that were not in favor of a conflict, of a war, or of a kinetic action against Iran. So I think there were a lot of attempts within the intelligence apparatus to try and dissuade a military campaign in Iran. But I mean, as I said, the president rubbished his own intelligence and said, "I know better," in one of his statements. So if, as I said, expectation is always strategy and strong policy making, but we are in a different Washington DC right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for Kabir for speaking to the print and helping us really understand what is happening and what is expected. I think, as you rightly mentioned, we'll have to just wait and watch what the Iranian response is going to be. And I hope the world at large is not sucked into yet another conflict. But thank you so much, Kabir.
Thanks so much. Thank you.